I'm not saying gold is the answer to everything. It's not. But a stable monetary system benefits everyone. And that's what most people don't understand because they're never taught that. They're taught that the bankers are at the top of the pyramid. The banks know what they're doing.
High interest savings accounts might get 1.5 points. Everything else, it's pretty tough. But I want to go back to what you just said about the dollar being stretched a little more. Like I get your iPhone reference, but what about food? I mean, food's not more efficient. You still have to buy it. It's tripled in the last 5-6 years with COVID inflation and things like that, right?
The old adage, in the United States is he who governs least governs best. I mean, if you're truly independent, the people are represented. Basically, let us be free, leave us alone, and don't impose too much rules on us.
Oh, I love that. Let's dial it back a little bit. Tell the audience who David Morgan is.
Well, I'm a financial newsletter writer. I've produced the Morgan Report since about 1999. It's focused mostly on resource investing. Right now, the main resources have been the precious metals, gold, silver, platinum, palladium. But we've looked at copper, lithium, uranium. A lot of the stuff we do is Canadian junior mines and Canadian miners because Canada is the mining capital of the world. Really, what I'd love for people to know is to wake up and vote with their dollars because that's where you have the power. Point is, I know some people are working 2 jobs and can't make it. So I want to be like, well, David, that's nice for you to say. You're a baby boomer and you had an advantage over me. And in a way, I did. I'll be honest about that. But on the other hand, I was also taught.
I'm Garrett Wong, and this is the Investing to Win podcast. How do you define success, and what does winning look like for you? David, you spent 40 years warning people about a financial system most people still trust completely. But if someone's watching this right now and has their savings in a bank account, what did they not know that they wish they did?
I think that inflation is insidious. I mean, it's pervasive, it's worldwide, and it eats away at your savings. So the only time really having a bank account is a smart thing is if the interest you're being paid is above the true inflation rate. So the government has manipulated the inflation, the CPI, Consumer Price Index, after 1980. They changed it. They took out 2 critical things, food and energy, the 2 things that the human race needs the most. And so they have a false indicator of the inflation rate. So they'll tell you it's 3% or thereabouts, when the true inflation rate by the 1980 metrics is more like 9%. So if you were not getting 9% return on your cash holdings in a savings account, you're losing every year. And that's the thing that I think most people don't understand. And it's small. It's, 3% doesn't sound like much, but it compounds. So if you go to the Federal Reserve Board's website, they will tell you that the $1913 is worth 2 cents. So it's lost 98% of its value. And the mandate is monetary stability, which monetary stability means you've got a stable dollar. And in a sound money system, you do have stability. For example, I could buy gas for 25 cents when I was 16 years old. Right now, a silver quarter, a 90% silver quarter, will actually buy me 2 gallons of gas right now. So it's maintained its value. It's actually increased in purchasing power. So in a sound money system, you do not need a financial planner. You really don't, because you know that $1 at age 20 when you start in the workforce will buy you more at age 30, more at age 40, more at age 50, and more at age 60. And why is that? Because you get a very gentle, and I mean gentle, deflation. Because the human race is really great at making a better mousetrap. You look at the iPhone 4 and you look at the iPhone 15 or whatever we're up to, the cost may be the same, but it's far more efficient. It does a lot more things, and that's true pretty much across the board. Look at the automobiles, look at housing, look at most things. So in other words, as the productivity increases and gets better and you get better products, you are getting a gentle deflation because that dollar is buying you more value over time. So you would say, look, if I'm getting, I started as a degreed engineer for $6 an hour in the early 70s. The minimum wage here in Washington State is almost triple that amount. Yet triple that amount, you can barely make ends meet. So people say, well, we need to set the correct minimum wage. No, because the number will change with inflation. What you need is a system that has a sound money, that you have a constant. Because if you have a constant, you can measure what the value is. And if you measure the stock market against gold, it peaked in the year 2000. 26 years ago was the peak versus a constant or real money. If you look at the real estate market, gold has outperformed real estate over the last 25 years by a factor of 4.5. So I'm not saying gold is the answer to everything. It's not. But a stable monetary system benefits everyone. And that's what most people don't understand because they're never taught that. They're taught that the bankers are at the top of the pyramid. The banks know what we're doing or what they're doing. They're there to serve us, which they're not really. And that what else are you going to do with your money? Obviously, you can invest in that type of thing. I'm just talking about the average person that doesn't have a stock account, doesn't invest in real estate, is getting by, and the only excess capital they have, they put in the bank because they think that's the safest and best place. They're not going to lose anything. The problem is by keeping it in the bank, you're guaranteed to lose in an inflationary environment.
There's lots to unpack there, David. When we go back to what was the average inflation rate in America last year? It doesn't have to be accurate, but
it was like 2.5 to 3%.
2.5 to 3%.
By their measure, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. And I'm up in Canada, and I think ours is like 3.5, 4% or something like that. So, I hear what you're saying because at least up here we're lucky. High interest savings accounts might get a point and a half. Everything else, it's pretty tough. But I want to go back to what you just said about the dollar being stretched a little more. Like I get your iPhone reference, but what about food? Food's not more efficient. You still have to buy it. It's still, it's tripled in the last 2 years, 5-6 years with COVID inflation and things like that, right?
Yeah, good point. I love you pushing back because I love to think. I'm a deep thinker. Yeah, well, that's sort of the corporate situation. Everything in America is profit driven. And I still maintain, capitalism is probably the best system, but I like to call it conscious capitalism. So if we were really conscious about it, we wouldn't have GMO foods. And the Green Revolution was really a lie. Yes, we produced more, but of what quality? And that's where the marketplace comes in, because in a true free market, people would vote with their dollars and say, I'm not buying this junk. It's not got any nutrition in it. In fact, I'm going to digress a minute and you can cut me back, Garrett, but I was on an airplane. I used to travel a lot, like 20 times a year worldwide. And in one of my flights, I forget from where to where, it was two Scandinavian guys, and I was probably in my late 40s, and they were probably in their mid-20s, and one sat next to me, and they were talking, and they had traveled all over the United States. So me being the big thinker that I think I am at times, I thought, well, I'm going to ask a real profound question. I asked the guy next to me, what is the most profound thing you learned about the United States or take back to, to Sweden? And I was thinking the Washington Monument or, seeing the Constitution under glass or, something like that. And he looked at me and he says, all Americans are fat. And I said, wow. And he goes, you don't have any nutrition. We go into the store and you got potato chips and Coca-Cola and Twinkies, and there's no food with any value in it. He goes, in my country, every food item in the grocery store has like a pie chart graph that shows you what the nutritional value of what you're buying is, how much carbohydrate, how much fat, how much vitamins and minerals and everything else. And I was kind of flabbergasted, Garrett. It's like it was a slap in the face, but so true. And I was probably sporting an extra 10 pounds at the time, to be honest.
You took it personally.
Oh my goodness. But I'm glad I got that out because so that's the deal. A real market where we vote with our dollars, we have a real profound impact. The problem, and to go one step further, and you can give it back to me, is people are so desperate now, they have to buy crappy food because it's all they can afford.
Yeah, I don't want to go down my own rabbit hole either, but one thing you talked about government involvement and, overreach, and I don't want this to be a conspiracy theorist type podcast, but up in my province, up here in Canada, we have rent control, as you do in different states in America, right? And what I find happening is, for example, I'm in the province of Manitoba. We have rent control. and rents are sky high. And it's almost like when you introduce a parasite or some kind of something into the nature, like it's not natural. So then nature kind of goes off a different path. Meanwhile, in the province of Alberta, there's no rent control. And yet their average rents are less than ours. So the government in Manitoba is actually imposing rent control to try to drive rents down when in fact the opposite is happening. So I just find it's just interesting what you said there about inflation and how the government is getting their fingers into things.
Yeah, well, the old adage, in the United States is he who governs least governs best. I mean, if you're truly independent, the people are represented and, basically let us be free, leave us alone, and don't impose too much rules on us. We know how to, our moral fiber is strong enough, but those days are long, long gone, as we both know. And again, I don't want to make this conspiracy either, but I like the ideology because, the American dream, like the late, great George Carlin said, the American dream is just a dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. Unfortunately, that's a valid statement.
Oh, I love that. Let's dial it back a little bit. Tell the audience who David Morgan is.
Well, I'm a financial newsletter writer. I've produced the Morgan Report since about 1999. It's focused mostly on resource investing. Right now, the main resources have been the precious metals, gold, silver, platinum, palladium. But we've looked at copper, lithium, uranium. A lot of the stuff we do is Canadian junior mines and Canadian miners because Canada is the mining capital of the world. Anyone that's in the industry knows that. And they produce some extremely awesome, not only developed mines across the world, but also stalwarts in the industry. So many that are Canadian. So very partial. 40% of my subscriber base is Canadian, by the way. But I just do my best to write an outline every month on kind of the big picture, the macroeconomic picture, and why you need some protection in the real asset class. And then what I like about the equity side or stocks of mining companies or royalty companies is not only do you get dividends, but you also have protection against inflation and they're leveraged. So if gold goes up 10%, a good gold company will go up 30%. But it works both directions. So if gold goes down 10%, a good gold company may go down 30%. So you have to be aware of that. But over time, for example, my favorite silver mining stock is up about 35-fold. And that'd be the equivalent of silver being at $200 the ounce right now. And silver right now is about $65 the ounce. So you have the advantage of getting a dividend, as I just said. You've got the compounding. And you also have a better exit strategy because the equities are not taxed as highly as the metal itself. So you got a tax advantage. And you also don't have slippage because in a very strong bull market, as we're in and saw, especially in January of this year, Garrett, there was a huge decrease in the bid-ask spread. So when silver is at 120, most dealers are bidding back to 100. That's 20% of a haircut. Whereas if on a stock, you got the value of that day. In other words, you don't have that slippage. The market's going to determine it. So lots of reasons to be in both. I advocate real metal first. And once that's accomplished, you move into the top tier, cash rich, unhedged royalty and mining companies. And I'm a big believer in investing in the best of the best, which means your blue chips. And then the rest you can add to your portfolio as your risk tolerance increases.
So sort of stable as she goes type of thing.
Yeah.
I was going to say, were you always in financial or was there a previous career or did you kind of get out of high school?
I wanted to be in finance and my dad put the kibosh on it. He had a bad stockbroker. He said, "You're not doing that." I answered him from the head and heart. "What do you want to do?" "Well, I want to be in finance." "No, you're not." So anyway, long story, I decided I wanted to fly for a living. So I started flying at age 16. By the time I was 19, I had every rating you could achieve. I entered Cal Poly San Luis Obispo for an aeronautical engineering degree, which I accomplished. I taught flying all the way through school. I taught the dean of architecture how to fly, his wife, a few others, a couple cowboys. And the dean of architecture actually became vice president of San Jose State, which is another story. We're still friends to this day. In fact, got him investing in silver at about $18 the ounce, so he's pretty happy with me. But so I had an aircraft career. I got picked up by the JTF. I just started the Joint Test Force.
Mhm.
So out of college, I worked on the contractor side as a flight test engineer, and I did that for over 10 years. But during that time, I still moonlighted on the side. I got a real estate license. I also had an insurance license, and I was working part-time for a certified financial planner. I was in the futures markets and trading stocks at the time I was 16. So my heart was kind of in both places. But when I left the aircraft industry and started my own financial newsletter, it brought me ultimate happiness because I felt that's what my purpose was, and I enjoyed it the most. Although I've got a lot of hangar flying stories and a lot of great memories from working with the military all those years.
Oh, well, no, thank you for your service there too. You know, you have basically, because I've done my research, built a career and ideas that some would consider fringe.
Mhm.
At what point, and this is, I think, what the real disruptors of the world need to have is your type of outlook. Because at what point do you stop caring about what mainstream says and just go your own way? Otherwise, innovation isn't pushed. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree. First of all, one of the big epiphanies for me was quite early in my age, and it was a political class because all through from kindergarten on, you're taught either directly or indirectly, to obey authority. You could go to a policeman or fireman anytime; they're safe, and that's just an example. But you're really taught that someone knows more than you, and you're kind of guided that the political class does represent the people and that type of thing. And I determined probably around 19 or 20 that was a joke. That I learned that the left wing and the right wing were attached to the same bird, and the destination was the same regardless of red or blue. And that's something that very few people had at my age. And as Doug Casey says, you may know him. Doug is a very well known financial newsletter writer. He says he doesn't vote because he doesn't want to encourage them. And so I pretty much ruled out someone solving my problem. In other words, to believe that, Mr. So and so or Miss so and so is going to actually do something for your benefit. Now, to be fair, there are occasions where, the political class does act in good faith and perhaps does benefit or does the will of the people, but that's very rare. The reason being is that if you believe what I believe, that money is power, and you have the power of the printing press, as the banking elites do, most of these Congress critters and senatards can be bought and paid for. And most of them are. And it's called the lobbyists because the lobbyists get in there and, hey, we'll fund your campaign. All you have to do is propose this. And that's written for them. These people don't come in and make laws as their edict is. They make the law. No, the lobbyists write the laws and hand it to, the committee that's working for senator or Congress critter and all of that. So it's really something that most Americans still don't understand. It's like we just get the right person in the White House or just the right senator or the right congressman for my district, things are going to get better. And that's relying on someone else. I mean, the great American Republic started on individualism and self-integrity and basically, the old pull you up by your own bootstraps. In other words, leave me alone. I can do it. I have help, my community, but I don't need a lot of outside influence to direct my life. So that was a lot more freedom. But with freedom comes responsibility. And people are taught not to be responsibility. It's a very much of a victim mentality, although they won't use the word victim. It's not my fault. My congressman should do that. Or
Right.
if I vote for this person, they'll do it for me. They don't want to get involved and take responsibility. If something goes wrong, most of us in America are taught to blame somebody. It was my parents. It was my teacher. I didn't get to go to college. I didn't get the right job. I should have been paid more, and on and on and on it goes. So it's a bunch of whiny babies. And I call it the big daddy syndrome, where they're looking for that political figure, big daddy, to come to the rescue. And I learned something a long time ago in one of my men's groups about you know you're an adult when you realize that the cavalry is not coming to the rescue.
So, what is somebody supposed to do then? Because somebody might be saying, well, David, that's great, but what do you want me to do? Run for office? What can one person do? You can't fight City Hall. I mean, all those old cliches.
Yeah, well, one is you could, and especially at the local level, like being on the school board, for example,
Yeah.
or the city council. I mean, that's grassroots as you can get, and you
Yeah.
could make a difference there. I'm not advocating. Most people don't want. Most people that have a good heart and head really don't want to be involved because they know that the political class is one of the most corrupt out there. Although, again, there are some good people there. So that's one, but it's pretty remote to do any good. Really, what I'd love to for people to know is to wake up and vote with their dollars because that's where you have the power. The
Right.
power of, when I say money is power, it works for everybody. So let's say that we just voted with our pocketbooks a certain, I don't know, landmass, for example, where a data center is going to be built. And
Right.
now they have eminent domain. Well, wait a minute, it's property rights. Get a good property attorney. I mean, I'm just making this up off the top of my head, Garrett, but get
Sure.
the idea that the power of the money, again, goes both directions. It's just, trying to tell everybody to buy organic. Well, you can't. It costs too much. People are, the dollar has such little value. You got to buy the, stuff that's available that you can afford, unfortunately. But had we, let's say earlier on, refused the GMO treatment and some of these packaged foods, and all of a sudden Doritos were boycotted for 2 months, guess what? They wouldn't be there anymore, or fast food places, or what have you. So there is that power. Other than that, to educate yourself, perhaps you can't control the powers that be, but you can control your own environment. And I think that's where it
Yep.
starts. To my own self be true. I'm going to eat healthier. I can't afford, to eat, perfectly, but I can cut out this and that. And, food on the table is going to be better than it was because that's now become a priority for me. And maybe my entertainment budget goes down or whatever. I mean, the main thing I would teach is for people to live within their means. And again, that's control what you can. And again, I'm empathetic. I've got a pretty good, compassionate heart these days. And the point is, I know some people are working 2 jobs and can't make it. So I don't want to
Right.
be like, well, David, that's nice for you to say. You're a baby boomer and you had an advantage over me. And in a way, I did. I'll be honest about that. But on the other hand, I was also taught from the beginning to live within my means. I mean, there's many times I could have bought a car on payments, but I didn't because I thought it was a waste of my money. So I bought a secondhand car and paid for it. That type of an attitude. And it doesn't make me better than anybody. It's just the idea of living within my means was important to me. I'll give it back to you. I've spouted out a lot, but really it comes down to individualism, what you could do for yourself and your own family, and not being selfish. I
Yeah.
don't mean it in that way because your community is extremely important, but you got to be able to think for yourself. Critical thinking and personal integrity are the two things that you can control. And with that, it could branch out to how you eat, how you live, how you exercise, what meaning you give to life. I was taught one more time again in one of my friends' groups, and very profound. He said, "Well, I know the meaning of life. Meaning of life? What? Come on, buddy, tell me what is the meaning of life?" And he said, "The meaning of life is the meaning that you give it." And then I had to think about that for a while. But that's really a fair statement because, if your meaning is video games and Doritos, that's the meaning you're giving it. Look at what you're doing. But if your meaning of life is working in the soup kitchen once a month because you want to give back to the community, that's your meaning. So really, it is a lot of the meaning of life is the meaning or the purpose that you put into it yourself, and that's a decision. We have free will. You can, be on a video game or you can work at the soup kitchen. I'm just using that metaphorically, but you get my point. And, what provides the most happiness. And I've found the older I get, really giving back is probably some of the most happiness I get. And I do that, in my work, trying to help others maintain their wealth, preserve their wealth, and be able to give back to their communities.
I would agree with what you just said, David, because I think for people out there who say, well, you can't fight the system or whatever, if everybody were to take care of themselves and have their own little micro environments, it does make a difference, right? Because your kids go to school, they see values, your neighbors, your friends, all of a sudden there's a movement, right? Before you even notice it. Um, we were kind of debating back and forth in the green room, and then I kind of said, hey, we should probably hit record. This is starting to get good. So I'm a real estate investor. You said, you had gotten a real estate license many, many moons ago. We were starting a debate. And honestly, right now, at least at the time of this podcast recording, I would agree with you that real estate's dead. Tell the audience a little bit about what we were talking about and your views on stocks and things like that, blue chips versus what I call tenants and toilets.
Well, there's lots of ways to make money. And, we've talked about legacy wealth, and this is where you build a legacy for your children's children's children. And what does that? And there's really three things that do that. Jim Rickards talks about this fairly often. It's gold, it's real estate, and it's fine art. Those are the three. Those three things you could pass down from generation to generation to generation. So real estate's very important. So I want to get that clear before my next couple of statements. And like anything, gold, real estate, even fine art does ebb and flow. All markets go up and down. So, but in the long term, real estate is real wealth, gold is real wealth, and fine art is real wealth. And those things will continue onward for, again, generations. On the real estate side, I just feel that it was not a fit for my personality type. So I dropped out being a real estate investor fairly early and just decided to focus on stocks. And I did. And the thing about the stock market is what I have taught at the Morgan Report is to use what's called covered calls, which I like to refer to as renting your stock, because most real estate investors know exactly what renting a house or renting an apartment building or renting a warehouse is all about. And in the stock market, you can actually rent your stock. It's called, if you own the company or the stock, for every 100 shares, you can write one call option. And the call option writer, the person selling the call, wins 85% of the time, or 80 to 85. So that's a huge advantage over playing craps or any other, casino type thing. It's very strong versus the stock market in general. So if you own, let's say, 1,000 shares of XYZ Mining, a top tier mining company, and you can't write calls on any stock, it's pretty much got to be a blue chip. So you've got 10 calls that you can write. And if you do that and say write 3 for a near duration, 3 more for 6 months out, and 3 more for 9 months out, you kind of cycle through like buying T-bills. And the average rate of return is about 17% a year. So you can get a yield on gold. You can use a gold stock and write covered calls. And it's a lot less cumbersome than renting a house where maybe the toilet backs up or the tenant, there's rent control, or the city says, we're redoing the road and you can't get to the place or whatever. And I've been there. But anyone that's in that, situation and loves it or wants it, that's fine. I'm not saying, all I'm doing is giving you an opportunity to see. And the thing about stock rental is the worst you can do is make a profit. So let's say, for example, I write a covered call at $100 the share, and I write it 3 months out, so I get $110 the share. 3 months go by and the stock is at $115 the share, so I get called out. So I made $10, not 15, but I still made a profit, but not the maximum profit. So now what do? Well, some people, oh my goodness, what do I do? But you have to just sit back, take a deep breath and say, what is my business? I'm in a stock rental business. I have to resupply. So you buy that stock or perhaps a different one in the same category, and you've got inventory again, and you rent it back again. And you could do that over and over. And I equate it to having a bad renter in your residential real estate. You get in there, you get 6 months rent, and the person trashes the house. You got to replace the stove, 2 doors, and redo some of the drywall. You didn't make a dime on it, but you got to put it back together and re-rent it, and you do that. It's part of the rental process. Same thing with my analogy, except in my analogy, you actually did make a profit. You just didn't make the maximum profit. So there's advantages to it. It's not for everybody, but it's a very easy mechanism to take advantage of getting a yield on something that most people think you can't. They don't know about renting stock versus renting real property.
So that's fascinating. I've actually never heard that term before, or at least maybe I've heard the technical terms, but I really love the way you laid it out for me there in layman's terms. So if I'm hearing you correctly, David, then when we talk about the comparison to tenants and toilets, fine. I mean, are you saying there is no bottom on that? Because yes, a tenant can wreck a house. Yes, the value can go down. I guess, like, walk me through the safety of renting a stock, as you say.
Well, it depends how you do it. So there's what's called a buy right. So you buy XYZ mining at $100 a share and you immediately write a covered call at the same time. If you're, that's a good way to do it because you're starting at a zero basis. But there's other times, let's say you buy XYZ mining at $100 a share and you've held it for 4 years and the gold market's sold off. So now that stock is at, $80 a share, not 100. You feel a little reluctant to write a call at 85 because if you write the call at 85, maybe you get $90 for it. You're taking a $10 loss if you get called out. So that's something, that could take place. I mean, if you didn't know about it, you get in, so that's an example of, coming in late to the party. And I'm not saying everyone should immediately start renting their stock either. I'm just, being honest. So there's
Right.
people that hold the portfolio and they're down. You can write calls and actually there's a way to do that, which is pretty protective. So if you bought it at 100, is at 80, you could write a call for 100. Now you're not going to get very much for it, but it's better than getting zero, right? So
Mm-hmm.
maybe in that instance, you'd only yield maybe, let's say, 4% a year, but you're at least going to break even on it. And you may as well do it because if you're, upset that you paid 100, it's at 80, well, why not take advantage of a top tier company that you already own and get that 4% rather than sit there on the sidelines complaining about the price, at least get some of it back. And there's other techniques too, I won't go into,
Yeah.
but that's one way to approach it. So the other thing is if you're way up, and when I try to tell my people on my videos that, when these things get overextended, that's the time to write these calls, because people get excited, the emotion comes in, the stock's really moving, and you can write calls and get a higher premium because of the volatility. When they're really moving, the time decay value goes higher. So you get, more bang for the buck. And again, you might get called out and only make a good profit, not the maximum profit. But many times, if you call it correctly, you'll get the whole premium and keep the stock at the same time. In fact, that's very often what happens. So you basically have your cake and eat it too. The options expire worthless, and you keep the premium, the whole premium, and the stock at the same time, and then you just do it again.
No, fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I travel around the world and I have a lot of high net worth individuals that I do business with. And then even just in Austin 2 days ago, and I was having dinner with billionaire John Paul DeJoria. He's the founder of Paul Mitchell Systems and Patron Tequila. And I guess my point there is not to name drop, but just to say, a lot of entrepreneurs I talk to, and even myself, is there's this belief that there's, you build wealth inside the system. So scaling, exits, mergers and acquisitions, recurring revenue. And you're saying like the system itself is the problem. So what's your version, I guess, of a winning financial strategy for someone like me who's a business owner?
Well, I think businesses are fine. I think that's probably one of the best ways to build wealth. So, having a viable business that's, honest on the up and up, especially if it serves others at the same time, I think that'd be, number one. I will give the caveat that most people that are looking from the outside and say, oh man, that guy's so lucky he has a
Yeah.
business. There's not a lot of luck involved. It's a lot of
No,
work. I started
it's
the
a lot.
Morgan Report on a shoestring and I worked my tail off
Yeah.
for a long time. And my first year in business, I made $6,000 for the year.
Yep.
And most people would have given up at that point. $6,000, I can't feed my family on that. Luckily, I had pretty good savings from my aircraft career, and I was able to maintain for a while, but not forever. And I just had that leap of faith and continued. The second year, I was like eking out a living, but loving what I was doing. And then about the third year, it caught on fire. And also was the right place at the right time. I was an early adopter on the internet, one of the few to specialize in, at the time, in silver, although I looked at all mining companies, not just silver. So I got a reputation of being like a silver expert, and there weren't too many in the beginning. And then again, it caught fire and didn't have a lot of competition, and it just really, really took off. But I also flew around the world 3 times and spoke in Hong Kong and, Australia, all over Europe, Canada, more than I could count, South America. It wasn't like it just happened because I put up a website. There's a lot to it. So most of us that are in business know we pay a price to be in business, but once you get it going, it is very rewarding.
That's so true. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say here is everybody thinks that somebody who's an entrepreneur, you're so lucky that you have time on your hands. Well, we really don't. We work 20 hours a day, or that guy must have got lucky, right place, right time. And honestly, there is really no such thing. Being a business owner is really, really tough. And I think there's a stat out there that's 93% of all businesses, 93, never make it to $1 million of gross revenue. Like, think about that. That means only 7% of all companies ever make $1 million. And I'm not saying it's easy to make $1 million, but certainly do you think there'd be more companies than just 7%, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you would. Well, I think
So,
about some of these. Sorry,
yep.
tell me more. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I would go ahead and finish your point there because I want to
Well, I
talk
just
about
interrupted you, but I was thinking about, some like these restaurants and that type of thing. And these people they're just making a living. I mean, they might be better as a wage earner for their
Well,
time. They come in at 6 o'clock, they clean their own restaurant. They work behind the counter because they can hire help if they need to. And, they're working, 10-hour a day, and then they got to close down and clean all the machines and go home. And
yeah.
that's a grind. And maybe they're making a little bit more than the average person. All I'm saying is I'm agreeing with you, but most people look, oh, wow, you own that Mexican restaurant? Oh, wow. And they immediately think it's a business, you must be rich. No, as you said, to point out that a lot of these people are doing it because it's their passion. They want to serve others. They want to serve their food. They got the grandmother's recipes. And that's great. I applaud those people. But to think that all business owners, the other thing, the startups, I forget the percentage, but I think it's in the 90s. Something like 90-something% of all startups fail.
Yeah.
And that's where I kind of gooned it on a cryptocurrency. It was backed by silver initially and then backed by gold and silver. The guy that ran it for 7 years turned out to be a total criminal.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people lost money, myself included. And it wasn't until near the very end. I was suspicious the last couple of years, but I wasn't convinced. And so I didn't, I stayed neutral, but I have some relief because I told everybody from the get-go, let's not do this until it's up and running. That's the time to get involved. However, if you're willing to take the risk I'm willing to take, and you want to, front run it and put money in as a founding member, then I'm not going to tell you no, but realize, the risk involved. And I should have said, remember 90% of these things fail. Had I said that, I would have felt a little better than just saying, it's a high risk proposition.
You mentioned restaurants, and I don't want to dwell on it or insult anybody, but I don't call a lifestyle business a business, really, right? Something that depends on the founder, that forces you to work in your business and on your business, a business that doesn't have a value that, you can exit and things like that. But I'll leave that point there because I wanted to spend a couple minutes talking about silver because, you're talking about silver as a medium of exchange, right? I mean, that just sounds like, I don't know, theoretical, archaic, but you actually you've seen it, used it at farmers markets. What does that transaction actually look like in real life?
Well, as we're still allowed to contract in this country,
Yeah.
So you could actually make a deal with the landlord and say, the rent's $1,000 a month, but I'll pay you 900 in silver, and some would accept it because they know that that 900 over time will continue to buy $900 10 years out, 20 years out, or whatever. And also, like at the farmer's market, I just ask them. I've played games because not always, but often I'll just,
Yeah.
I'll be up and let's say I want to buy a bag of potatoes at a farmer's market. And so the person behind the counter will say, do you accept money? And they'll say, oh, of course. And then I'll put out a Federal Reserve note. I go, well, you don't want this private script then, do you? They go, what? That's money. I said, no, it's not. This is issued by a private banking corporation that has nothing to do with the federal government whatsoever at all. It's called the Federal Reserve, and it's a private piece of paper. It's not controlled by our government. Our government has to borrow it from a bunch of private bankers. But this is a silver quarter, and this is equal to 12 of these things. So do you want this money or do you want this piece of paper? And so it's a teaching lesson because there's people all over.
Yeah.
Some are listening to this, and I'm educating the person and being very kind about it. And sometimes I get as far as showing the quarter and they go, I want that. Don't even talk to me. Give me that paper. I've had that happen. So I do. I'm not going to fight them, right? But
Yeah.
at least I've still planted the seed, And
That's hilarious. How many people are accepting the coins or silver coins versus paper money?
80% probably. One out of 5 will say, no, just give me the greenbacks. I trust that. That's what I want. I had it happen recently. I had a little work done on my car, and it was a private guy. It wasn't a corporate situation. And I asked him, you want real money? And he was real quick. Don't give me, I don't know anything about silver. I don't care to hear about it. Give me that. And I did. And,
oh, he already knew?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Speaking of contrarian views, you did a documentary there and you talked about Maslow's hierarchy, and I believe you flipped it right on its head. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? I mean,
yeah,
that's a pretty big
absolutely.
claim.
I mean, I have a 4-year-old. Well, she'll be 4 July 3rd. She didn't quite make it to the 4th of July. Anyway, she'll be 4. And it got me thinking even more than I have in the past about, what's the best we can do for our youth. And to me, I think it's education, which is really boils down to critical thinking. To be able to critically think, is the political class serving us or are they a bunch of parasites? What's really going on? And don't believe everything you read, everything you hear, and everything you're told. So that's part of it. Bring me back. I just kind of lost my train of thought. What was the question again?
No, I just talking about Maslow's hierarchy.
Oh, yeah. So what I wanted to do is flip it on its head because we're taught over and over and over to be successful. Everything success is determined on something outside of yourself. It's the right house, the right car, the right job, the right watch, the right clothes, eating at the right restaurants, buying, having the right dog. I mean, it's everything external to yourself. And that is not correct. What's correct is you in and of yourself are enough. And that's really all you need to understand. But you got to know it to your heart of hearts. You got to know it deep in your bones, as the old expression goes. And that's what we need to teach our children, that they have won the greatest race and beat the odds of anything unbelievable. They won the sperm race. So they came out one out of millions or billions. I forget the normal amount. And they hit the egg and they're here. So they're here for a reason. I believe everyone has a purpose and you beat the odds beyond belief. So you are here and you are priceless. So if we teach our kids from the get-go that they are enough and they're served best by serving themselves and others, that is more important than anything they accumulate outside of themselves. I mean, even Alexander the Great, love him or hate him, was told, his followers when he died to put his hands outward and empty to show everyone that you can't take anything with you. And so it's the legacy that you leave, not the gold, the real estate, and the fine art. It's a legacy of what you did with your life, how you served others, how you helped others, and the difference you made in the human race, be it one person. If you help one person better themselves, you've done something worthwhile. So that's flipping it upside down. It starts off, well, get your food, your water, you get educated, and then the hierarchy of needs is met. And then you get to the top, you get self-actualization. You get the time to meditate, to contemplate philosophy, to realize what's the purpose of life and all those things. No, you come in knowing the purpose of life is you are enough and you are priceless and you have unbelievable purpose and opportunity. And it's not dependent upon what you accumulate. It's dependent upon what you actually realize as a realized being and start them there. So that's really the purpose of that film, among other things. But that's something that I think is a metaphor that people can identify with, because
Right.
most of us in the business world have heard about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I certainly bought into it. I mean, when I was in my 20s and 30s, man, I want to be financially independent. I don't want to have to work for the man anymore. Even the aircraft business, which I really had a great time most of the time. It was hard, but I'm still punching that clock, not literally, but
Yeah.
I still had a boss and a boss and a boss's boss. And you know what I'm saying? And I wanted that entrepreneur of where I work for me. And of course, I've achieved that over the last, several decades.
Just for the audience, we're talking about Maslow's hierarchy, and it's really defined, audience, as just a theory of human motivation. Depicted as a pyramid, I guess, that people have to satisfy psychological or physiological, I guess, and safety needs before you can go down. So, like, the first level would be like food, water, warmth, safety would be the next one, then love and esteem, and then finally, you know, self-actualization. And I believe, unless I'm misparaphrasing you, David, you're flipping it, saying let's take care of ourselves first, and then the rest will follow. And it's fascinating, actually. I love that you're willing and just to put your 4 decades of experience out there and teach, because I think if we can, they say teach a person to fish versus, right, and teach them a skill. So I applaud you on that. I know we're running out of time, and I told you I'd get you out of here at the top of the hour. So I always ask every guest that I have one question, and you're no exception. So,
Okay.
David, this is the Investing to Win podcast. How do you define success, and what does winning look like for you?
Well, success to me is to my own self be true. And what does winning look like? I think it's I believe strongly in giving a hand up, but not a hand out. In other
Mm,
words, and I will give a hand out to street people occasionally, that type of thing. And I always do a quick prayer, whatever. And once I give it, I give it. If I gave it to somebody that's going to get a bottle of wine, so be it. Let it go. But I really believe the purpose is to be of maximum service to others. And the paradox is you can serve yourself and others at the same time. I mean, my financial newsletter is telling people what investments I'm making. So that's certainly self serving, but it also serves them at the same time because they realize, oh, this company over that one's a better buy, or it's, pays a higher dividend, or whatever the case may be. And obviously, I don't get it right 100% of the time, but I don't think anyone in my group expects me to. But they do expect me to be honest, and when I'm wrong, admit it promptly, and we move, correct and continue. So that to me is, I think, real success, because again, it's the memories that you leave. That guy helped me, or he taught me that, or geez, I didn't know about covered calls, whatever it
150%.
may be, is important, because again, you can't take anything with you, and the palms up. That's something good to remember, because just getting stuff. So what? You get to the top of the mountain with a bunch of gold, and I like to say it. Accumulating a bunch of real money doesn't really serve anything if you've lost your freedom. And that's the main deterrent we have now is the powers that be not only control the money, they want to control us totally through the new financial system. And that's something to be aware of.
Yeah, well said. I also prescribe to the servant mentality, and that question was actually quite timely considering we're talking about Maslow's. David, great conversation. I'm going to put links to your newsletter and some of the documentaries and other work that you've done in the show notes. But for now, I'd love to do this again sometime. But thanks for coming on the show today.
Garrett, it was a real pleasure. Thank you.
All right, take care.